Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. As you already know, you have to choose the language. Also, the speakers, I invite the speakers too, if they do not understand Italian, because there will be partially something in Italian. So please, using the icon interpretation, you can choose the language that you prefer. We have English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, Polacco, and Arabic. We will stream this meeting and we keep all the microphone muted during the meeting. This is what I'm going to do right now. So I'm inviting the interpreters to unmute themselves. We start in 1 or 2 minutes just to make sure the interpretation is working well. So if you have any trouble, please, you can write to Sister Florence or myself and we can try to help you. We wait for the other people joining us. Welcome, everybody.
Okay.
Please keep your microphone off. Sheila, you can open it. You can unmute it later, please. Thank you. Just the last technical guidelines. Please select your language using the icon down below. And I invite also the speakers to do that because there will be something in Italian, but most of the webinar will be in English. This webinar will be recorded. We will take photos. So if you don't want to appear with your face, you can just stop your camera. Welcome again. I will move into Italian. Benvenuti a tutti e a...
Welcome to all of you to this last meeting of the webinar series, Sisters Empowering Women. Today we will speak about peace, and we have chosen the words of the Magistry of Pope Francis. We as UISG, we really feel proximity. We have chosen 6 words which have basically allowed us to organize 6 meetings with these 6 words. And today the word we have chosen is peace. The word peace in Greek means a pause between 2 wars. While we feel that with our speakers, we interpret peace in a different way, not only as a lack of conflict, a lack of war, but this will certainly allow us to open up a new perspective. The quote we have chosen from the encyclical letter Fratelli Tutti of Pope Francis is 198, which I'll now start reading slowly, because it also will be a moment of prayer. We normally open our webinars with a moment of prayer, And so if you want to do that and listen, closing your eyes, I invite you to do so because it is a very rich and very full of wisdom. Approach each other, to express oneself, to listen, to look at each other, to know each other, try to understand each other, look for points of contact. All this can be summed up in the verb to dialogue. To meet and help each other, we need to dialogue. There's no need to say what dialogue is for. I did only think what the world would be without the patient dialogue of so many generous people who have kept families and communities together. Persevering and courageous dialogue does not make the headlines like clashes and conflicts, yet it discreetly helps the world to live better, much more than we may realize. Now I just invite you to remain in silence, listening in silence. Which of the words of this quote echo in us? Which words echo in me today?
Vorrei rileggere solo una riga, perché in questa riga c'è scritto quello
Allow me to read once again one sentence for a second time, because this will be precisely what we're going to do today. That is, listening to people who in their daily lives transform the lives, their lives, the lives of communities, and they do not hit the headlines, but they do suffice to think what the world would be who, if without the patient dialogue of so many generous people who have kept families and communities together. These are sisters who use as dialogue peace, coexistence, tolerance, and that in listening to their testimonies, we will feel that they are actually theological spaces. And the title of this is Nourishing Peace, Social Dialogue and Social Dialogue. The first one, the first speaker is someone you are very much familiar with. So nurturing peace, social friendship, and dialogue. This is the title. So the person I will introduce to you is a Franciscan sister, but Sister Sheila Kinsey is really living and is giving a living testimony of her choice of life, and she will express that in her reflection. Just allow me to spend just a few additional words.
Sister Sheila Kinsey, at the moment, she's the coordinator of the USG campaign Sowing Hope for the Planet. She's also the executive co-secretary of the Justice and Peace and Integrity of Creation Commission for both unions, men and women. Recently, Sister Sheila was also appointed by Pope Francis as a member of the dicastery promoting integral ecology development. She collaborates with the movement, the global movement Laudato Si, and the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. The three sisters that we have today with us, someone is, they know each other and they have been working together. So they are really three sisters. Sister Sheila is a sister, is a Franciscan sister of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and Mary. She comes from the United States, but we can say that now she's an international sister. We ask Sister Sheila to reflect, to help us to reflect on the interconnection between ecological interconnectedness and nonviolence. Sister Sheila, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Patrizia, for giving me this honor of being able to share in this important webinar. I will begin the session with the sharing on the ecological interconnectedness and nonviolence. So in Fratelli Tutti, we hear there is a need for peacemakers, men and women prepared to act boldly and creatively to initiate processes of healing and renewed encounter. In the Peace Day message of Pope Francis in 2017, Pope Francis asks God to help all of us to cultivate nonviolence in our most personal thoughts and values, in the most local and ordinary situations, and in the international law. May nonviolence become the hallmark of our decisions, our relationships, and our actions. So with these words in our heart, let us face the ecological interconnectedness, beginning with the consequences of the ecological crisis. Forests and oceans have been over-extracted. Climate change has brought drought and desertification. Sea levels have risen and pollution has damaged our atmosphere with greenhouse gases. Countries are ruptured by conflict. Homes become battlegrounds. Conflict survivors journey to other countries for a better life. The catastrophe of the COVID pandemic has shown that we are interconnected. We're really a global family. The events in one country ripple through the world economy, affecting all of us. The need to work together has become painfully apparent, but the will to do so struggles to be realized. A new system has to be established that benefits everyone, not just the fortunate few. Pope Francis speaks about a personal encounter with the saving love of Jesus. He calls us to be Christians with integrity, to be responsive to the heart of the people. Where can people turn in the world of such disarray? Through our way of life, we're called to embrace environmental and social concerns in light of Micah 6:8, to live justly, to love tenderly, and to walk humbly with our God. We can respond to greed through our just sharing benefits of our resources, through tender compassion, reaching out to the marginalized, and by listening and following God's way for us. The interconnected crisis begs us for solutions that involve everyone. Religious women are uniquely placed to make a difference. Our efforts in solidarity are now key, and our experience in partnerships are of critical and crucial importance. Pope Francis called the Catholic community to engage and commit to the Laudato Si' Action platform in response to the urgency of the ecological crisis. The congregations of women religious are coordinating efforts to realize the vision of Laudato Si' Action platform through the UISG campaign, Sowing Hope for the Planet. In this engagement, we religious are asked to make a public commitment about our efforts to work for a sustainable ecology, to actualize our commitment by transitioning to an integral ecology with the Laudato Si goals, and to network with others. It is important to consider the ecological connectedness of social and cultural needs, as well as the economy and the environment. All these aspects form a collaborative group, a synergy to bring home to all and to help others in our struggle with this endeavor. The Sowing Hope for the Planet is supported through social media opportunities, sharing of stories and resources. Cooperation is already taking place in many local, national, and international areas with events supporting and encouraging the growth of our own interconnectedness. Sowing Hope for the Planet supports congregations in developing their commitment in light of their charisms, which form the context for the gospel way of life and expresses the spirituality of the founding members as they work to bring forth the goals for Laudato Si. The campaign proposes us to provide and give religious the opportunities to network and to be fully engaged in determining how to make a difference. Through this process, congregations will be enabled to respond to Pope Francis' call to commit to an integral ecology. The journey can take up to 7 years. So the heart of Laudato Si Action Platform is the 7 goals of Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, Ecological Economics, Adoption of a Simple Lifestyle, Ecological Spirituality, Ecological Education, and Community Engagement, Participatory Action. All are interconnected and integral to a sustainable ecology. These goals are steps that will help create a just and sustainable future for all who share this planet, our sister, Mother Earth. How then is nonviolence integral to this ecological interconnectedness? For over 25 years, I've used a process called integrity for nonviolence in planning programs and events. This process is integral and it encourages personal change. In this practice, we become conscious of what we say and how we live in a way that supports and builds up one another to be persons of care and also of competence. The journey of reconciliation, restoring a healthy planet, promotes an integral ecology that exhibits behaviors from our integrity and is demonstrated in nonviolence and peace building. In our integrity, we are in touch with the purpose for which we are here and that place where we are alone with God. The voice of God echoes here, calling us to love and to do what is right. Here is our dignity and our purpose. Let us consider 4 values from the nonviolence process that can help us attend to God's transformation process: respect, honesty, justice, and wholesome relationships. Respect values the essential worth and dignity of all creation, where all are appreciated. To be in reconciliation, it is imperative that we acknowledge the truth of the reality and honor the reliability of scientific data. We embrace our Christian identity and seek to follow the way of Christ, who reconciled all things in himself. In justice, we demonstrate responsibility and accountability for our actions and dialogue to negotiate for fairness, equitability, and well-being for our common home. We nurture wholesome relationships that build upon trust and promote healthy relationships and provide essential resources for a viable life.
Sheila, it's too fast.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. As we begin the journey of realizing the goals of Laudato Si. The way of nonviolence can be integrated into our participation in sowing hope in these areas. The Cry of the Earth asks for carbon neutrality and to protect biodiversity. We must address false assumptions that technology will simply solve these problems. We need to be forthright regarding the loss of species and the damage done to the ecosystem, and to adhere to God's plan for us to care for creation. The Cry of the Poor respects human life and rights from conception to death. This reverence extends to the most vulnerable groups, the destitute, refugees, Indigenous people, children. We must create universal access to essentials such as clean water and healthcare. Ecological Economics supports a new system of economic development that benefits all. It calls for ethical investments, a circular economy, that concepts are developed to support sustainability for all and for future generations. Adoption of sustainable lifestyles focuses on just stewardship, avoiding consumerism, and focusing on deeper realities of life for a sense of meaning. We be accountable, responsible, and make changes to help. Live simply so that others can simply live and share what we don't need. Ecological spirituality embraces the religious vision of God's creation, encouraging contact with the natural world with a spirit of wonder, of praise, joy, and gratitude. It promotes creation-centered liturgical celebrations, developing an ecological catechesis, prayer, retreats, and formation. In ecological education, it is a reconception and redesign of education curriculum and educational institution reform in the spirit of an integral ecology. It creates ecological awareness and contemplation with a deeper respect for the care of the value of creation. They call us to justly develop and to sustain an environment interconnected with social concerns. The step of emphasis on community involvement and participatory action is to care for creation at the local, regional, and national levels, and promote advocacy and create people's campaigns, encourage rootedness in local territory and neighborhood ecosystems. In attending and in networking, we realize the opportunities for reconciliation, healing, and forgiveness with the process of integrity for nonviolence. In trying to resolve conflicts, integrity is imperative. In facilitation and coordination of the project, the process of interaction with one another integrates the essential four values that promote respect and honesty, justice, and wholesome relationships. In creating respect, it begins with the courtesy of attentively listening and honoring everyone's innate dignity. The essential message is every person is important, even those with a different perspective. A safe, non-threatening place allows helpful and productive ideas to surface without persons feeling intimidated. Practicing honesty means using credible information to consider the whole picture. We must truthfully acknowledge that we have contributed in some way to the degradation of our environment and have benefited from the violation of the human rights of others. Promoting justice provides opportunities for accountability and responsibility. Using nonviolent communication skills, situations can be resolved without blame or personal criticism, when we engage in dialogue. In nurturing wholesome relationships, consciously developing actions that demonstrate trust and strengthens relationships. Follow through and follow up needs to be consistent. Encourage participants to use their abilities for the good of all. So when we can move toward a deeper and wider practice of nonviolence by focusing on simple values, which prepare us to be attentive to larger issues. We can develop prayerful reflections which challenge us to be attentive to those in need. By consciously attending to being persons of nonviolence and compassion, we prepare ourselves to be responsive to God's grace in the moment, and that moves us towards the message of peace. Thank you.
Grazie veramente,
Merci. Thank you so much, Sister Sheila, for really having helped us to become aware of this interconnection, which at times we perceive, but we are not fully aware of this journey of or path of nonviolence in favor of an integral ecology. I believe that at times we as women, we are able to perceive this interconnection, but I also have understood that many sisters, after reading Fratelli Tutti, really felt a true echo of their actions and works with their people. So really, thank you once again, Sister Sheila, and we really hope and wish you that you can continue carry on with this mission in the framework of the Laudato Si, that is with a 7-year ongoing commitment. And we are learning from you, Sister Sheila, that many congregations are now starting really to do a lot, from the very simple gestures to protect the climate, but also to major, let's say, works. And I know that you will be very much engaged in the COP26, and we invite all of the sisters to pray for you, because when all the governments will meet and gather, they will have to take on the responsibility for climate change. Thank you once again, Sister Sheila. I also would like to remind you that on our website, we have a beautiful interview on Sister Sheila. She also dwells upon a bit her personal experience in the field of nonviolence, which allows us to have a more complete view of our speaker. And now I'm honored and I'm really very pleased to introduce you our moderator for today. And also with her, we had a beautiful interview yesterday, because I look at her because she's here at our headquarters, UISG, where she spoke about her experience with religious and missionaries. So you can find this interview on our website with the ambassador. It is really a great honor, and I'm very pleased to introduce you with Her Excellency, the Ambassador to the Holy See for the Netherlands, Caroline Gabriella Weivers. She has a lot of different tasks within she has been in Tunisia and Benin, so former ambassador, but she also has a long experience in the field of accompaniment, peace, non-violence, which she has carried out in different parts of Africa. In addition to her personal studies, international politics and the protection of human rights, she has been personally committed herself. And yesterday she has summarized the engagement of an ambassador, of a Madam Ambassador, that is to bridge build bridges, sorry. And so we really want to thank you sincerely for your presence today and also for being the moderators. So to you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia. As you know, it is for me a pleasure, but also an honor to be here. And I'm very grateful for your question to give me this honor of moderating this meeting. Because the subject is very dear to my heart personally, and it is, fortunately, also one of the priorities of my country and my government in the international realm. I really enjoyed Sister Sheila's talk just now because she connected the subject, the theme of peace, very strongly and very clearly to the very topical issues of climate, environment, and ecology. And basically, she was talking about non-violence vis-a-vis nature, vis-a-vis the creation. We've seen some beautiful examples in the past weeks, and there's more to come with the joint statement of Pope Francis and the Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. That was already a very clear call to society and to world leaders. In addition, on the 4th of October, we are expecting a joint call by religious leaders from all over the world, from, let's say, all flavors, all backgrounds, cultures. And I think that will be a very important moment as well, leading up to COP26. As Pope Francis always says, and I must say that is one of the favorite quotes for me, everything is connected. And I think certainly themes like peace, non-violence, sustainability, ecology, a responsible way of dealing with each other and with the world, whether we talk about creation, like some of us do, or we just call it planet Earth, we all have a responsibility. Thank you again, Patricia, for this introduction. I would just like to say a few words about the title and the theme of the conference. Given my background as an ambassador, representing the Kingdom of the Netherlands, it makes me immediately think of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, which was adopted unanimously by the UN Security Council on October 2000. It acknowledges the disproportionate and unique impact of armed conflict on women and girls. It calls on all parties to conflict to take special measures to protect women and girls from gender-based violence, particularly rape and other forms of sexual abuse. But there's also the role of women in conflict resolution and peace building, which got attention in that context and which is still very topical, and we should not forget about that. The provision of basic necessities of education and healthcare that falls upon girls and women in times like those. Now, having said that, I confess, if I may use that word, that was my reflex given my own professional background. But what I find very interesting about this meeting and about the interviews with some of the speakers that I could already see thanks to UISG, is that you all emphasize peace is not the absence of war and conflict. It is broader, it is deeper, it is wider, it has a universal importance. So thank you very much for reminding me of that as well. That was very good. Now I'm quickly looking at Patricia to check whether I may introduce as a speaker Sister Vila Irota, who is, I gather, the former Superior General of her congregation of the Mercedarian Missionaries of Beris, Mission of Japan. Sister Philo served in the Philippines, Nicaragua, Mexico, and Rome. So you covered quite a bit of the world, Sister, which means you have this enormous experience also in operating in different cultures. You are on the Catholic Council for Justice and Peace of the Episcopal Conference of Japan. You play a very important role in Pax Christi International, the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, and the Women's Fund for Peace and Human Rights. Now, this is an incredibly impressive CV and list of all your activities, Sister Philo. I'm very happy you are here to share your experiences and your views with us. I know you mentioned, I think in the interview you gave to UISG, the plenary that is coming up next year in May, where these themes will come back again as well. And what I also noted, and I found it interesting to hear that, you were slightly critical of how gender equality is put into practice in Japan. Now there actually I have sometimes the same feeling about my own country. So it was interesting to hear that, but perhaps on another occasion we can swap notes on that as well. For now, I would like to invite you, Sister Philo, to make your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, for this presentation. This really is a very happy privilege, and I'm very grateful for this invitation. I'm very happy to be really connected to the UISG. And also the what Sister Sheila shared, we belong to the same group of Pax Christi Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, and we share the same vision and same commitment. So some of the things that I'm going to say is really sort of overlapping. But anyway, I would like to start my presentation. The biggest challenge that the present world poses to us humans, believers, followers of Jesus of Nazareth, and consecrated women committed to living life in light of a specific charism is to be agents of peace and nonviolence. The reality of today's world is characterized by violence at all levels. Pope Francis draws our attention to the reality of the world today, inviting us to listen to the cry of the poor and the cry of our common home, the planet Earth. The destruction of Earth's ecosystems and the suffering of all living on this planet are intrinsically interconnected with human violence. The direct violence of war and militarization, which is often caused by economic interests, is always destructive of the environment. The violence of corporate greed affects the environment and the most vulnerable, many of whom are forced to leave their homeland. Governments are pouring more money into the cost of militarization, thus depriving the most vulnerable of their right to life. The world suffers from the drastic divide between the haves and have-nots, and COVID-19 has widened the gap between the poor and the rich more. The excluded of society are victims of the cultural violence of indifference, exclusion, ignorance, and apathy. The violence of economic injustice, tainted with greed, sees human persons as commodities, things to sell and buy. In all these realities of violence, we know that more women and girl children become easy prey. We also understand that the cases of domestic violence have increased worldwide with the spread of COVID-19. If the violence of all kinds characterizes today's world at all levels, God calls us from this reality to be agents of gospel nonviolence and peace. Pope Francis in Laudato Si indicates that everything is interconnected. Violence, however, breaks, disrupts, cuts, divides, hurts, discriminates, excludes, ignores, and pushes aside. This sinful and criminal reality today is very often justified by a culture of exclusion that refuses to recognize the dignity and fundamental rights of every single person living on earth. Thus, youth, older persons, ethnic minorities, indigenous peoples, migrants, refugees, Black and brown people, women, and persons with disabilities suffer the consequences of systemic injustice and inequalities. How can we follow Jesus as consecrated women in today's violent world? What does it mean to witness love in this loveless world? We are called to live radical nonviolence at all levels of our life and mission. Commitment to gospel nonviolence means a way of life, never to hurt or exclude anyone. The reality of systemic injustices and inequalities needs to be addressed holistically with a transversal value of nonviolence. Nonviolence calls us to witness Jesus' radical inclusiveness inside and outside. To live radical inclusiveness means to appreciate and value diversity rooted in the truth that the dignity and rights of every human being should be respected and protected. We know that every single woman and man is created in God's image. Most congregations have identified our call to live communion in diversity. We all know, however, from experience, that it is not easy to celebrate and genuinely appreciate diversity, be it cultural or personality, among ourselves in daily life. Today, however, the face of consecrated life has become multicultural. Anthony Giddens says that a congregation that does not commit itself to interculturality does not have a future. We need to continue renewing our commitment to being radically inclusive every day. This is not just learning a non-judgmental attitude to what looks different. Commitment to be inclusive calls for daily conversion. We need to make up our minds every day to accept and appreciate what looks and feels different. To live inclusive also means to live Jesus' equal discipleship. Relations that are not equal tend to dominate and control, and does violence to the person not accepted as equal. When we accept each other as sisters in egalitarian relationships, we feel loved, accepted, trusted, safe, and liberated. We read Jesus' own words about equal relationships in the gospel. The first will be the last will be the first. There is no teacher among you. He insists on egalitarian relationships among his followers, including women. Only equal relationships are liberating. In equal relationships of loving care, we can grow to be who we are, what we are, as God's image. If we are a community of women committed to radical inclusiveness, our community can become a space of healing, tenderness, and compassion to people who suffer from the violence of rejection and indifference. We know that there are many people who suffer isolation, solitude, and exclusion. They feel there is no place where they feel at home. A community of women committed to radical inclusiveness can be a place where lonely people feel at home and welcomed. In this way, our community can be a visible witness of who Jesus is in today's world. In Japan, the Catholic Church is a small minority of 1 million in 130 million. Within the Catholic Church, those of us committed to JPIC are a small minority. Other denominations also face the same challenge of fewer people committed to justice and peace. We work and collaborate with other faith communities and citizens' movements in many life-threatening issues, such as nuclear arms, nuclear power plants, military bases, environmental destruction caused by industry, poverty, human trafficking, etc. The presence of consecrated women in these organizations and networks is much appreciated. Our presence could be non-threatening, gentle, unselfish, humble, and joyful. Even in organizations and movements working for peace and justice, the challenge of interpersonal relationships always is present. Our role in the situation of internal conflicts and friction is to help parties dialogue and enable them to see the reality from the other. How can we be a prophetic voice of peace and nonviolence when we are a small minority? Though the Catholic Church in Japan is a small, almost invisible minority, congregations, corporate ministry of education, healthcare, and social welfare are visible in society. There are many ways to share our commitment to peace and nonviolence through concrete means to recuperate the interconnectedness of God's creation with people we meet daily or regularly. To be an agent of peace and nonviolence also means to be a woman who knows to let go, who knows to laugh at herself, who knows to enjoy life. And above all, who knows to enjoy being with others, humans, animals, trees, wind, the whole creation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sister Philo, for this rich discourse you shared with us, in which there were some, I would say, lovely sound bites as well that we can all use in the future. You started off by mentioning how COVID-19 has widened the gap in many respects in I think almost all societies, and you mentioned the systemic injustice and inequalities, and how one should appreciate diversity as opposed to closing one off from it. One very interesting remark as well, I thought, was that the face of consecrated life has become multicultural. And that is good, of course. There is the inclusion there as well, the diversity. There was another phrase that really struck me, that was how you talked about a community of women committed to radical inclusiveness. Now, that was a lovely expression as well. Thank you very much for all your thoughts that you have shared with us. And undoubtedly, we will come back to that later on in the Q&A, when people can submit their questions to the speakers. Thank you very much, Sister Philo.
Thank you.
Pleasure. I would like to propose that we continue with our next speaker, which is Sister Vashira. Welcome. And I gather we may call you Sister Theresia, and welcome to Sister Theresia as well then. You are part of the Loreto Sisters. You're very much involved with Pax Christi peace, and you say peace is not the opposite of war or conflict. It's much wider than that. We have to be inclusive. You may have noted I stole your phrases already in my introduction earlier on. And you also mentioned how women tend to be excluded because of the patriarchal societies they live in. Well, that is something that we have to stand up against, sisters. And then I don't just mean the sisters belonging to a congregation. Women should speak for themselves. That is the red thread in your approach of things. Well, you have a brilliant CV. I've been very active in all sorts of areas related to conflict resolution, and peace. You were also a member of the board for Abundant Life Center in Kenya, which was started with the aim to train and advocate against female genital mutilation in Kenya, a very important cause in other areas as well, in other countries as well. Then you're very much involved in the Vatican COVID-19 Commission, in the Security Task Force, and many other areas. I think it's better actually if I ask you to give your presentation. Sister Theresia, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll ask Sheila was to download it for me.
No, I can do that, Sister Theresia. I can
Okay,
share
fine.
your screen, and just so you can let me know when you want me to pass on, okay?
Okay, that's fine. Thanks. Yes, so I would like to first begin by thanking all of you for coming, and then to say that I will be giving a detailed version of this PowerPoint. So I'm just using the kind of the short form because I'll be speaking to it. I find myself tired in a screen because I prefer to talk with my hands, and also you'll excuse me. So I have been asked to look at the way of active nonviolence for justice and peace. Next slide. So I would like to first speak to what I understand about nonviolence, what nonviolence means. Nonviolence, according to me, is a core gospel value, a way of life, and that it nurtures hope. Therefore, nonviolence should be part of our DNA. And then it is a necessary foundation for a culture of peace. And to borrow the words of Cardinal Peter Turkson, it was not just a response to a particular situation in the life of Jesus, it was the whole life of Jesus. Next slide, please. So what do we mean then by active nonviolence? It is living the gospel values, love for all, even those we consider enemies, whether they're in our communities, whether they are in the society where we live, or even enemies that are in our heads that we actually create in our own minds and hearts and souls. And then it is about peace. And as Her Excellency, the Ambassador, pointed out from my interview, peace is not just about direct violence or what we see, the violence we see in the world, people killing each other, people maiming each other, injustices, but also we need to address the area of structures and cultures that create violence and perpetuate violence. It is about forgiveness, reconciliation, becoming part also of our DNA, so that it's not something we speak about, but we live it and it becomes part and soul of us. It is also standing against all forms of injustice, inclusive of ecological injustices that we see, because the environment cannot speak, it cannot cry. So we need to also include that in our thinking around active nonviolence. And today, in the reality of COVID-19 pandemic, we find that the challenges are becoming worse and therefore challenging to peace. And as religious women, and of course, we include men, this is not different from our call to live our vowed life of obedience, poverty, chastity, individually and as communities. So we find that by living these values, if we live them in totality, day by day, accepting their challenges, then we can say we are beginning to live in active nonviolence. Therefore, it's not something out there, but it is within us. We need to go back to the root of it. Next slide, please. Now that is a graphic showing a Black Jesus. And as you can see, one hand is kind of pushing. It's kind of showing he's pushing. And this is Jesus pushing all those aspects of oppression, aspects of injustices. And then the other hand is open to forgiveness, to reconciliation, to all the good that is in humanity. So the next slide explains those hands. So we move on to the other one. Now, so as women religious, therefore, how do we walk in the path of active nonviolence? One is that we embrace and model the gospel values by following the nonviolent Jesus. So the issue of embracing, what does that say is that we cannot give what we don't have. We need to first appreciate those gospel values, live them out in our own lives. And by doing that, then we are able to model it for other people. Then also there is a call to respond anew to the call to be with Christ. And all of us, when we make our vows, because we are vowed people, we do say we are called to be with Christ. And what does that mean? Is that we embody these values by taking time to pray and reflect on these values. And then, as Philon was saying there, we rejuvenate ourselves. So it's not just about praying and reflecting, but also trying to take time out somewhere in quiet, whether we are enjoying ourselves, we go and try to internalize these values. And then to model these values to those we meet and collaborate with on a daily basis. What does that mean, therefore, is we then have to re-evangelize. So we are being called to be sent out as well. And being sent out is not necessarily like we have congregations that are apostolic, like they go out there to meet people. There are those that are enclosed. So here I'm talking about being called and sent out wherever we are, in whatever charism we embrace. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, sorry, the one before, sorry. So we have to be, sorry, you need to go back again. Sorry, Patricia. So we need to wait for the slides.
Just a second, I'm trying to find a way.
Don't worry, we'll get there. So before Patricia puts it, maybe
Is this one?
Yes, the Be Women. Yes, that's the correct one. Thank you. Yes. So we are called to be women at the heart of the gospel and the church. So that is challenging because we are being called to leave our comfort zones. And I would like to dwell on this because all of us have our own beliefs. We have our own worldviews and we have our own attitudes. So we all come to congregations with our own beliefs, which were inculcated as children and as we grew. And also we try to come and we embrace within our charism. And our worldviews, the way we look at the world, the way we see the world, the way we interact with the world, and then the attitudes we create. However, these attitudes have to be within the mind and heart of Christ. Therefore, we have to be listening. What are the signs of the times? What are we seeing? What are we being invited to do? Therefore, we can no longer sit and keep on holding to our boots. We have to leave behind those boots that tie us from looking at the world and the way the world is moving. Then believing in our own potential and power as women called to transform the world, because there is a lot of gem in women. However, we have to believe in ourselves and in the power that we have and the potential to transform our society. Then support and collaboration with other women and also male religious and other male collaborators. Because as women, if we just walk alone, and in my society, for instance, in the African society, by just walking alone, we'll find ourselves not moving because we have to bring men on board so that we break down those structures of oppression, those structures of exclusion, those structures of machism. So the men have to be brought in a healthy way as we move. And then as women religious, we have to access, we have actually the access to nonviolent teachings because of our formation. And of course, the moral authority, because people look at us as consecrated people, people whom they can look up to. And then of course, permanence, we have the religious structures that support us. So in fact, we are the bridge builders to bridge different communities, people of different religious affiliations and different orientations. So as religious sisters, we are in very, very strategic positions and very, positions of trust by the people and positions where people can come and be nourished to move on. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share then my own experience, how I live this active nonviolence, because I have first to live it before I can share it out. One way I do this by embracing the gospel values to live out BVM with my sisters and responding generously and creatively to the signs of the times. I have to keep asking myself, and together with my sisters, what are the signs of the times? And as IBVM sisters, we had in 2014, we had some general congregation calls. And one of these calls was that we reclaim the gospel, the newness of the gospel. The other one was to move where the need is greatest. And the other one was to bring the poor close to us. So how do I respond to that? I have to do that as an individual. And that's what I'm aiming to do each day. Then supporting and encouraging girls and women to speak in their own voices. As the ambassador captured that women tend to speak using the voice of others, especially the men, in my own context. And I have to encourage girls and women to speak in their own voices, to challenge the forms of harmful cultural practices, like the one we are talking about, the female genital mutilation, exclusion of women at the different tables of negotiations, of fellowship, and also other forms of exclusion, even in education and in health. So I have to encourage the women to do that. Of course, I do advocacy work, as you shall see in the next slide. So the next slide. So I engage in advocacy for especially abused and marginalized in our societies, both locally and globally. And I do this through forums like this one, where I speak. And I speak strong against this because we cannot, as women, even women religious, have people speaking for us. We have to be at that table, speaking for ourselves as women, for our society. And I usually say not as an agenda item to be there for people to say or speak for us, but we ourselves have to stand and speak for ourselves as equal partners with our counterparts, the men. And then as an academic, I contribute to academic research, especially with and for women. So I'm doing a lot of research on that to try and bring especially the role of women in peace building. And currently my ongoing research is on women's key contribution through indigenous peace building approaches to violent conflicts. And what I've found, and I would like to share this because there is a lot going on in peace building among the people, especially at the grassroots. Like the women are using the oral literature to pass on the values of peace, of justice, of integrity, of honesty to their children through stories, riddles, myths, legends. So the women are doing that and through songs and dance. Also the spoken word. Women are speaking peace to their children. They are blessing their children with peace. And for me, this is a way of inculcating active nonviolence. The women also using symbols such as the birth belt and motherhood as a way of inculcating cultures of peace. And I would like to, in the next slide, to explain this particular symbol that is in the next slide. Now, you can see there a woman wearing a belt. Okay, this belt is modernized. However, it brings out the value of peace. That belt that this woman is wearing is a birth belt, which also these days is used as a peace belt. This belt is to help the womb after birth to come back to shape. However, the woman uses the same belt to bless and protect her children and the youth. Okay, it has been used before to bless young people going to war. However, the women are reversing that and using it to say no to war. So in the past, from my research, is that it was used to reconcile, to ask for forgiveness, to mediate, and to restore. And now women are using it to dissuade men from engaging in violence and going to war. It's called the legatiate in this particular community. So if a woman removes this belt and puts it on the ground, the men cannot go to war and they cannot force the woman to wear. Women also use this same belt. If the husband wants to attack her, she can wear it and the man will not attack. She can also use it to bless. So it's becoming a symbol of peace. And therefore, we are encouraging women to go back to those indigenous practices so that we can create peace in our world. The next slide. What about as Pax Christi? Because I am the co-president of Pax Christi International. How am I and my community in Pax Christi, Philo and Sheila involved? How are we trying to build women and young people and both young men and women in our world. Currently, we are seeking funds and utilizing those funds to enable build up a pool of women religious and young men and women. We are training them in active nonviolence. And currently, we have ongoing training in active nonviolence in the Great Lakes. And we have trained very many sisters who are actually doing great work, and also young men and women doing great work in creating cultures of peace wherever they are. And maybe later on we can share the website and you see the great work that the women religious are doing, passing on active nonviolence to the young people, to their own sisters, and to even leaders in their country. And in a few months, we are going to roll the same project in Kenya and South Sudan, where we are going to train sisters so that they can train young people, and those young people can train others in active nonviolence. So what a great service, but it's also not a service because those sisters have gained from this training, and they too, through their way of living of active nonviolence, are modeling the nonviolent Jesus. Next slide.
Sister Theresia.
Yes, I'm finishing.
Okay,
Yeah.
Forgive me
Yes.
for interrupting, but
Yes, I'm finishing. I'm on the last slide. Yeah, this slide is a book that we have of on active nonviolence. It's a 1-year project we did with theologians and biblical scholars. So it's available. And then lastly, it's a blessing. I would like to leave this sharing with a blessing in my next slide. So through our call as religious women, in embracing these values of active nonviolence, which is key to achieving a Laudato Si future and advancing for France's timely Fratelli Tutti, we become the voice of the voiceless, inclusive of the voiceless environment, bread for the hungry, spark for those who grope in the dark, and vision for those whose dreams are shattered, the accompanying compassionate Good Samaritan, the bearer of the good news that Jesus came that all may have life and have it more abundantly. Thank you and peace to you all.
thank you very much, Sister Theresia. And what a beautiful way to end your presentation. Thank you for that. Your call for non-violence, for justice and peace. And also you mentioned how the sisters are not just praying and reflecting, but also internalizing these values and going out to share them with others and basically spread the word, spread the message on that. You also mentioned the importance of support and collaboration with other women, so non-religious women, and with the male religious and with other men. So basically a wide collaboration, not limited to the sisters, but obviously going out and working with others as bridge builders. And your attention, the attention you drew to the signs of our times, of course, is very meaningful as well. Thank you very much for this, Sister Theresia. Now we've reached the moment that we can invite those who have been following our online meeting to submit any questions or comments. You can do that in the chat. We will gather these comments and then we will see what we can put forward to the speakers you've been listening to so far. So I will give everybody a minute or so to formulate their questions, put them in the chat, and then we'll have a look at them. Thank you.
while we wait for comments and other questions, I would like to ask 2 questions to our speakers, and then we will add some more. The first one is actually, the questions are for both of them. What do you mean by equality? You talk about equality for men and women, for different. So what do you mean in concrete with equality? The other question for both of you is how we can train sisters in nonviolence. Here are some other questions. Then you can decide to answer to some of them and not to all of them. So you will have just like 5 minutes each. Again, how to educate for peace in formal and informal educational settings. So again, the formation. How to develop a culture of inclusiveness in the culture where women are not equal, given the same space and place. Katie is asking if, referring to Philo, she wonders if there is something that we need to do to encourage others, our sisters, you know, when to work on justice and peace. There is a specific question for, I will tell in Italian, una domanda specifica per Suor
There is a question for Sister Theresia on African symbolism about water. How do African women venerate water?
I think we can give the floor to the speakers for 5 minutes each. Sister Philo first.
Sister Philo, may I ask you to reflect on the questions that were submitted? And actually there were at least 2 that were specifically addressed to you, as you may have seen.
Yes, which one? Okay.
How receptive is the government to the work of the religious, especially when religious do advocacy for the poor? And the other one was how you were talking about the few people working for JPIC, but so engaged to collaborate with others. I wonder there's something that we need to do to encourage others, our sisters.
Okay, the first question about the how does government sort of listen to the religious? How do I put it? Okay, in Japan, since we are such a small minority, and also, as I said, the JPIC sort of kind of people, a small minority. So we always come together and we work and collaborate together. So when we do advocacy work, when we talk to the government, we go together. So it's Christians, Catholic, Protestants, Buddhists, Shinto is not so much, but basically Buddhists are, I mean, Buddhism is a sort of biggest sort of denomination in Japan, although there are many different groups and schools of Buddhism. So the reaction of government is not because we are religious or citizens movement. It all depends what we are asking the government. For example, this nuclear arms, the Japanese government has not signed or ratified the nuclear prohibition treaty. And we are always, all of us asking to do that in collaboration or in solidarity with hibakusha victims, or nuclear power plants, the same, or US military bases. All these issues, we work together, and this Liberal Democratic Party government doesn't just listen to us at all. So it's not just we are religious or not religious. So that's it. Now the JPIC, how to encourage and animate sisters or brothers. I think we have to ask the question to Sheila. Sister Sheila has been doing that. And I can say that because, and I have been with the JPIC for many, many years. And I remember when in the beginning of 2000, I was in Rome also as a JPIC promoter. And I realized that many of us who were in Rome then used to be activists, sort of loner kind of activist in the congregation. And then I realized that those of us who had not been accepted before within our own congregation were in Rome. And since then, I noticed that for example, the JPIC, Sister Sheila organizes formation program every year, especially for new beginners of JPIC. I think you always have a good group of a number of people. So I think we are changing, because we can see the sowing hope for the planet. I think many congregations are participating, and then also I think one thing is, I think it's very important, JPIC promoter, our attitude is very important in our own congregation, because before the sisters, I'm talking about my own congregation, many sisters were allergic because this is what Philo is doing, or so and so is doing. So I sort of I can blame myself, and what is wrong with my attitude. So I think if we are talking about inclusiveness or right relationships, how much how much are we really? We are. Okay.
Thank you, Sister Philo. Perhaps I should give Sister Sheila the opportunity to add a few words to this.
Well, I would like to say that my work on nonviolence really started with my work domestic abuse and sexual assault for 8 years and having to change the narrative. So when you asked about equality, we want to be at the table and hear that voice. And at the time when I started, back in the 80s in the United States, and we had followed the work that was done in England, scream lightly so your neighbors won't hear you. And it was really changing the narrative. The woman was not crazy, she's not making up a story, and it's very difficult for her to leave. So getting that story out and realizing it's not enough to help the woman, we have to change society in justice and peace so that the receptivity is there. And I was so involved in that at that time that when they wanted to acknowledge the most influential people at that time, 100 of them in a 350,000 catchment area, I was named as helping to change that narrative. It's persistence, it's telling the values that I mentioned, justice, respect, wholesome relationships. And really what happened when I shared those stories, then others said, we're in a violent situation. How can you help us learn how to deal with that? And that's where the integrity came forth. And really, when women would come to the shelter, this
Sheila,
is 24
slow,
hours.
Sheila,
24 hours. It wasn't telling a program to put on them, do this, do this, do this. It was helping them believe in themselves. and to give them a way of going forward in a violent situation that really developed those values. And I learned so much from the courage of those women going forth. So it was about justice, it was about creating peace and knowing how to have decent, healthy relationships, you know. So that's it.
Sister Sheila, thank you very much. I hate to cut you off. I hope you realize that.
Oh, it's okay.
But there's one or two questions that I'd like to submit to Sister Theresia as well. There was a rather specific question from someone who would like to know a bit more about the symbolism of water in African culture and the sort of veneration of water. Could you say something about that? And then there was another remark, which was about the situation of people who have been displaced and live in refugee camps, and how to educate for peace in those sort of environments as well. Sister Theresia.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now, I would like first of all to put a disclaimer that the African culture is wide. So I can't speak to every African culture, but I know the general view about water is equated to life. So the value of life, because women in Africa, especially in the countryside, have to go long distance to get water. So they don't take water for granted. And if you look at the different, some communities, there's stories around water, there's songs around water. When women are going to fetch water, it can tell you it's a value. And I remember growing up myself, being told, stop wasting water. Even the pots, you know, the earthen pots that preserve water are kept very well. So you can see that water is a value among communities, but each community would be having different symbols. So I wouldn't generalize all of it, but maybe just say that water and life are associated. And women in general in Africa are mainly engaged in farming and planting trees, planting crops. And because we believe the more forests you have, the more water you will have. And the value of rain. When the rain comes, there's a lot of rejoicing. And children are allowed to go naked and run in the rain. So, I mean, as opposed to the way we are seeing in the cities, that people are getting umbrellas to prevent themselves from the rain. In Africa, you'll see children running and enjoying the rain. So that tells you the value of water. But I haven't studied around that symbol, but I know from my own community that water is a value. Then the one about education and in displaced communities, actually that's a concern I have had myself, because in Kenya especially, we have nomadic communities that move from one place to another. When the rains come, they come back. When there's drought, they move. So it has been one of my concerns. How do we educate these people? My approach would be the way I do my research is going to the grassroots and listening to the narratives of the people and asking what are their needs, not coming with a generic or what I call the liberal peace approaches with generic solutions to problems. So I would say, go to those communities, find out what is it that they need, because the education comes from the ground. Because the education in a classroom may not be what the people in the displacement area need. So my first thing is speak to the people, find out, and empower them using the skills that are already there. And of course, trying to bring equality among them. so that the children are not left out in the education that is in the mainstream. So that would be my approach, that we need to go there and bring education to the people as opposed to waiting for them to come. And obviously that there's an injustice there which needs to be addressed as well when you have displacement communities.
Thank you very much, Sister Theresia, for this very concrete and hand-on answer and recommendation for all of us. I should like to thank all of you for your way of responding to the questions that were put forward. I really appreciate listening to you and talking with you. Thank you very much. But that I pass the torch on to Patricia, I think. Thank you very much.
Grazie ambasciatrice, grazie.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, and thank you very much to all the many sisters who have been with us. And I think that thank you for your insight, because that is really testified by the many questions and comments. Unfortunately, we were unable to attend them all, but I would like to leave this message with Sister Sheila. Sister Sheila, we truly cherish for this topic. I think it really deserves to be further explored. I'm speaking about nonviolence. I've seen a lot of comments, so please, you and your sisters, the sisters who have been with us, allow us to be able to further deepen the analysis. Allow me also to thank our ambassadress, who has really been a pleasure having you, and thank you for accompanying us. We wish you all the best for your mission so that you may continue building bridges, our most heartfelt wishes, Ambassador. So now we're moving towards the end of this meeting, or who knows if it's the end or the closure of this meeting, or rather a new beginning. We have listened at a great flow of words. There are words which are probably now echoing, are maybe questioning us. And I would like to tell you, if you allow me, a short story, which is a story of restorative justice. And it is the story of Claudia and Irene, two women, two wives, two mothers. Irene is Matteo's mother, who one night, after leaving the disco, is stopped by a carabiniere, a police officer. They have an argument. Matteo takes a bar and violently hits the policeman, the carabiniere, whose name is Antonio. Antonio dies a month later in the hospital. Claudia is Antonio's wife. Irene is Matteo's mother. Matteo is arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment, as the word says, to be imprisoned for his entire life. Irene and her husband decide to write a letter to Claudia to ask her forgiveness. Claudia, after several months and against the advice of everyone around her, decides to answer to Irene's letter. A few months later, the two women decide to meet. Irene and Claudia meet, they embrace and cry. There are two women wounded and in pain for two different reasons, but whose wounds and pain are closely linked. Claudia is Antonio's wife, killed by Matteo, who is Irene's son. Claudia also decides to meet Matteo in prison, the boy who took away the lover of her life. For Irene, Claudia, and Matteo, for the three, a journey of healing, reconciliation, and care begins. Matteo will continue remaining in prison, and no one will be able to give to Claudia her husband's back. But from the ashes of a very great pain, they have decided to give birth to life again. I don't know if we can talk about forgiveness, but as Claudia says, resentment always condemns you to the past. In this story of restorative justice, the past does not change, but what does change is the present and the future. The friendship between the two women has generated a virtuous cycle of healing and care. What can we learn from this true story which occurred in Italy? What does it tell me about my life, my wounds? Let's now continue praying for these two women, but also for Matteo, who's now undergoing also form of revisiting, but he will remain in prison. I would like to now present and introduce you to Sister Pat. Sister Pat, I think you don't need any kind of presentation. The fellow sister of Sister Teresa of the Institute of the Virgin Mary, as the Sisters of the Loreto Sisters. Sister Pat is the Executive Secretary of the UISG, and she is weaving the various themes and topics that we deal with at the USG. We have invited Sister Pat to give us a closing remarks of this session of 6 webinars, but I know that she's not really going to close, but rather open up with new questions, a new path, a new way, on how these words of the Magistry of Pope Francis inhabit us as women and as consecrated women. The floor is yours, Sister Pat. Thank you so much.
Hello to everybody, and it's my pleasure to come at this stage of the end of the series of many themes. To thank Patrizia too for leading us on this journey, where we have looked at words like synodality, education, peace, economy, health, care and advocacy. And we've reflected on them in the context of Fratelli Tutti and also in the context of our own lives. I'm particularly grateful that we ended up at the word with the topic and the theme of peace. In my own early mission life, I was a peace education officer for the Bishops' Commission for Justice and Peace in Ireland. And I worked in Northern Ireland at a very difficult time of violence and division. And during that time, I came across in my reflection the 3 words that lead us to deeper levels of peace. First of all, you have peace as pax. We talk about the Pax Romana. Peace being the absence of physical violence. And obviously that's something we work towards. And then you had Irene. Irene is the Greek word for peace. And Irene, the female name Irene comes from, Irene, means the breaking down of barriers. So we need that too. And the third word is the shalom that we've been reflecting, the Hebrew word, abundance of life. Abundance of life for all of creation, for each, for all, physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. So we need the Pax, the absence of violence. We need the Irene, the breaking down of barriers. And we need, above all, the Shalom, the abundance of life. And I think the themes we've been reflecting on, synodality, education, economy, health, care, and advocacy, are a call to this abundance of life. That's why I see peace building as framing the whole. And I'm going to share with you, just as we end, my own learnings from a man called John Paul Ledrack, because I think this will help us on our journey into the future. John Paul Ledrack is a Mennonite. He's a theologian. He's a peace activist. He has worked in the Great Lakes area, in the Philippines, in Colombia, and many parts of the world in leading, in searching for peace. And he has a wonderful book called Moral Imagination, the Art and Soul of Peace Building. And I'm just going to share very briefly some of his ideas and concepts, because I think they encompass the journey that we're on as a church, where we're attending to synodality, education, the economy, health, care, in the context of this abundance of life that we hope for and desire, which is at the heart of our gospel way of life. So John Paul Ledrack sees moral imagination. He defines it as a vocation to search for the change that brings us to this abundance of life. And he talks about web watching and web weaving. And what he means by that is building relationship. He talks about yeast, a bit like the yeast of the gospel. And yeast is something that changes something. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then he talks about building platforms. So the vocation of moral imagination is to recognize turning points or moments that bring new possibilities, that we imagine new ways, new constructive processes of living together, that we work to give birth to what doesn't exist, and that we cultivate the art of leadership, because he says we're all leaders and we're all building this new humanity, this new way of being together. So he says we should look for turning points. And they're moments that point people in a new direction. And sometimes those moments come from what seems like impossible situations, what he calls barren ground, but which have the possibility for bringing new life. So I think the Synod is a turning point in the life of the church, offering us a new moment to turn in a new direction. And there are turning points in each of the areas. Like, what more do we need to do in education, in peace building, in building a new economy, in creating a healthcare system or systems that meet the needs of people, in bringing about care so that nobody is excluded or abused in any way. So he says we have to understand the social geography if we're web watching. We have to look at the signs of the times in our countries, regions, and we have to think about intersections in the web. So he says, look for all the people with whom you can collaborate. So as religious women, who can we collaborate? We've already mentioned many different groups today. And then he says, be smart, flexible. We have to keep finding new ways and being flexible about what we do and who we are. Then he talks about the yeast. And this I have learned from my own experience, particularly in peace building, that yeast is a small group of the right people being in the right place at the right time, but committed to do something within an organization or in a society. So I think what Sister Sheila is doing in building competence in justice and peace within congregations, they're the yeast groups that will bring about change. Or what Sister Gabriella is doing in Talitha Kum, or what each of you is doing in your congregations when you develop groups to focus on areas. It doesn't need everybody, but it needs the right people, a small group committed to bringing about change. I used to think that, and I remember when maybe 1 million people would meet in a capital city campaigning for change, and nothing much would happen. But again and again in my life, I've seen a small group of very dedicated people changing a system or a structure. And I had the experience myself in Ireland, where a small group of about 6 people changed the prison system by networking with as many people as possible who were involved in making decisions about prisons. Because the yeast group creates a platform. So the platform is a wider group who will campaign or advocate for change. So he had a very simple formula, is let's network together from different parts, different places, different interest groups, but around the same. Let's have a small strategic group that can involve others so we can change a little bit of the world we live in. So I leave you with this quote from him. He says, allow our imagination to rise up and to take you to a new, though mysterious and often unexpected shore. And he says, when you allow your imagination to rise up, it allows you to take a risk and to go to somewhere new. So on this journey that Pope Francis is inviting us to embark on, this synodal journey, it's a journey of risk. It's a journey where we'll be asked to weave webs, meet other people, reflect, discern, look at the needs of today in our place, because that's how we become agents of transformation. The lovely word that we used in several presentations today, that radical inclusiveness, and that we see ourselves as women religious as being part of this movement of change within the church and within the world. But it's an invitation to create webs of relationships, ones that exist, but ones that could exist, to become yeast, little yeast groups that are modeling a new way. So when we live in an intercultural way, we're multicultural, but becoming intercultural, we say we'll create a new community, a new way of living together. So we're giving prophetic witness to someone. So I feel we are in a privileged place to be little yeast groups of empowerment in our different societies. And so I think my call to myself and to you as we end is, we end this series, but start on a synodal journey, is to say, can we be these agents of empowerment, particularly as part of the journey that's unfolding ahead of us? The journey within the Synod, and also the journey within the Laudato Si goals and the Laudato Si platform. These are two very important moments in the life of both the church and the world. So my invitation to you is, get involved, risk, stretch out. And in conclusion, I want to thank Her Excellency for leading us today. I want to thank Sheila for her ongoing inspiration and grace. I want to thank Philo for all that she has contributed to UISG over many years in the area of justice and peace building, a leadership that has been very valuable. And I want to thank my sister, Wamuyo, for all that she contributes in Africa and to Pax Christi. And so my gratitude to all who have contributed to this series, and to Patrizia Morganti for her leadership, to Florence for all the technical support she has offered, and for our translators who in many different languages during this series have provided us with the help we needed. So my blessing to each of you, my gratitude, and maybe Patrizia, you have a final word.
Grazie veramente.
Thank you so much. I really don't have any other word to add. I believe this is the best way, but to give the floor to our participants. We're now moving towards the end, so we cannot add and sort of continue, but if you want to, write in the chat a word or a sentence after having received and listened at so many insights and so many deep reflections. And thank you once again to our eminent speakers, and have a beautiful evening. And if we want to write something in the chat, the the webinar is going to remain on and active.